My name is Sophia Williams, and at 28 years old, I was 3 days away from marrying the love of my life, Ethan Blackwood. Everything was perfect until his wealthy parents ambushed me with a prenuptial agreement and an ultimatum: sign it, or the wedding is off. What they never expected was that behind my modest facade lay $9 million, a successful tech company, and the determination to stand my ground. Their smug faces were about to meet the one thing they respected: money. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from, and if you enjoy stories about underdogs turning the tables, hit that like button and subscribe to join me for this journey of how I wiped those smug grins clean. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Chicago where my parents taught high school and instilled in me the values of education and hard work. We were comfortable, but never wealthy. Every cent of my college tuition came from scholarships I earned through countless all-nighters and perfect grades. I graduated with honors in computer science from Northwestern and immediately dove into the tech world with a hunger to succeed on my own terms. My grandfather had been my biggest cheerleader. When he passed away during my senior year, he left me a surprising inheritance. His modest lifestyle had concealed smart investments over decades, resulting in a $7 million estate that came to me. I invested most of it and used a small portion to fund my tech startup focusing on educational software. By 26, my company valuation added another $2 million to my net worth. But no one would have guessed it from looking at me. I lived in a nice but unassuming apartment, drove a practical car, and dressed well, but not extravagantly. I wanted to succeed or fail on my own merits, not because of what was in my bank account. My wealth was my private business, known only to my parents, my best friend Jenna, and my financial advisors. I met Ethan at a charity gala, benefiting educational programs for underprivileged children. My company had donated software, and I was there representing our contribution. Ethan was there because the Blackwoods always made appearances at important social functions. He stood out immediately, not just because of his tall frame and warm brown eyes, but because, unlike the other trust fund attendees, he was genuinely engaged with the cause. Our conversation that night flowed effortlessly from education inequality to favorite hiking trails to our shared love of spicy Thai food. When he asked for my number, I gave it without hesitation, despite knowing who his family was. The Blackwoods were Chicago old money with a lineage tracing back to early lumber barons. Their law firm, Blackwood and Associates, represented half the corporate power players in the Midwest. Our first date was a picnic in Millennium Park, where Ethan brought homemade sandwiches and admitted he had looked up my company online and was impressed by my work. That was Ethan all over, thorough but genuine. We were inseparable after that. Weekend hikes, cooking disasters in my kitchen, intellectual debates that sometimes lasted until sunrise, and a deep physical connection that made everything else fade away. He never flaunted his wealth, and I never revealed mine. It seemed unimportant in the face of what we were building together. He loved that I was passionate about my work and independent. I loved that despite his privileged upbringing, he had developed a sense of justice and fairness that guided his legal practice. When he took me home to meet his parents after 6 months, I caught the first glimpse of trouble. The Blackwood estate was a sprawling property in the most exclusive neighborhood of Lake Forest, with manicured gardens and a house that could comfortably fit 8 families. Richard and Victoria Blackwood were polite but coolly assessing. Victoria particularly had a way of asking questions that seemed innocent but were clearly designed to establish my pedigree or lack thereof. "Northwestern is a fine school," she said over dinner. "Did you find the scholarship program comprehensive? And your parents are both teachers. How commendable. Such a necessary profession. Though I imagine the financial constraints must have been challenging." Ethan either did not notice or chose to ignore these subtle digs. He was the youngest of 3 children and clearly accustomed to navigating his mother with practiced ease. His father was more direct, but equally dismissive, speaking mainly to Ethan about people and events I knew nothing about, effectively excluding me from the conversation. Still, I was in love, and these were minor irritations compared to the joy Ethan brought to my life. When he proposed on our 2-year anniversary on a sunset cruise on Lake Michigan, I said yes without hesitation. The ring was his. grandmother's, a tasteful emerald that suited my hand perfectly. Wedding planning began as a dream, but slowly revealed more fissures in the foundation. Victoria had opinions about everything from the venue to the flowers, and while she never explicitly mentioned money, there was always the unspoken assumption that the Blackwoods would handle everything because clearly, I could not afford the wedding that befitted their son. Rather than correct this misperception, I let them believe what they wanted. I had my reasons for keeping my financial situation private, and my pride prevented me from appearing to compete with them on monetary terms. Ethan tried to mediate, sometimes standing firm on things that mattered to me, other times gently suggesting our compromise. I did more often than not, because most of the details seemed trivial compared to the fact that I would be marrying the man I loved. When Victoria insisted on adding 50 of their family friends to the guest list, I agreed. When she dismissed my choice of wedding cake as quaint and selected a 7-tier monstrosity from an exclusive patisserie, I let it go. The only thing I insisted on was my dress, a sleek, modern design that made me feel beautiful and confident. Even then, Victoria managed to insinuate that I had chosen it because it was budget-friendly rather than because it suited me perfectly. As the wedding approached, I felt increasingly like a visitor in my own engagement, but I consoled myself with the knowledge that once we were married, Ethan and I would build our own life separate from the daily influence of his family. He had already agreed that we would live in the condo we had chosen together downtown, close to both our workplaces, rather than in the Blackwood family neighborhood, as his mother had suggested. 3 days before the wedding, everything was finally coming together. The venue was prepared, the flowers arranged, the catering finalized. I had just confirmed the final details with the photographer when I received a call from Victoria inviting me to tea that afternoon. Ethan would be in meetings all day, she explained, and she thought it would be nice for us to have someone on one time before the wedding festivities began. Looking back, I should have recognized the predatory sweetness in her voice, but I was operating on minimal sleep and maximum stress, and all I registered was the opportunity to perhaps finally connect with my future mother-in-law. I had no idea I was walking into an ambush that would test not just my patience, but the very foundation of my relationship with Ethan and his family. The Blackwood estate looked even more imposing in the clear light of that Wednesday afternoon. The stone facade gleamed in the sunlight, and the circular driveway was immaculately maintained, not a pebble out of place. As I pulled up in my modest Audi, I noticed Richard's Mercedes also parked in the driveway. That was unexpected. Victoria had mentioned nothing about him joining our tea. The housekeeper, Marta, answered the door with her usual reserved smile and led me to the formal sitting room rather than the sunroom, where Victoria typically took tea. Another warning sign I missed in the moment. Victoria and Richard were already seated, both dressed as if for a business meeting rather than a casual family gathering. Victoria wore a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, while Richard was in one of his trademark charcoal gray Powers suits, complete with cufflinks bearing the Blackwood family crest. "Sophia, dear, thank you for coming on such short notice," Victoria said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Please have a seat." I sat across from them, suddenly feeling like I was at a job interview rather than a family visit. The tea service on the coffee table between us remained untouched. We thought it important to discuss a few matters before the wedding Richard began. Without preamble, business matters that should be settled beforehand to ensure smooth sailing afterward, Victoria nodded. Every successful marriage has a solid foundation of clear expectations and agreements. My stomach tightened. "What kind of agreements?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect where this was heading. Richard reached for a leather portfolio beside him and extracted a thick document bound in a blue cover. He slid it across the coffee table toward me. "This is a standard prenuptial agreement that our family lawyer has prepared. It outlines the protection of family assets and delineates what would occur in the unlikely event that your marriage to Ethan does not succeed." I did not immediately reach for the document. "This is the first I am hearing about a prenuptial agreement," I said carefully. "Ethan and I have never discussed this." "Ethan understands the necessity," Victoria interjected smoothly. "The Blackwood family has significant assets that have been protected for generations. This is simply a formality that all spouses marrying into the family complete. I doubted that very much. Ethan's older brother had married a woman from a banking dynasty, hardly someone from whom the Blackwoods would need financial protection, and his sister had married her college sweetheart, the son of a senator, with his own substantial trust fund. Finally, I picked up the document and began to scan its contents. As a tech entrepreneur, I had dealt with enough contracts to recognize immediately that this was far from a balanced agreement. It essentially stated that in the event of a divorce, I would walk away with virtually nothing, regardless of the length of our marriage or any contributions I might make to our shared life. Any property acquired during the marriage would remain with Ethan, and there were clauses about intellectual property that could potentially impact my business. This seems very one-sided, I said, struggling to keep my voice neutral. Richard waved his hand dismissively. It is standard language for protect established family wealth. You must understand, Sophia, that the Blackwood assets represent not just money but a legacy stretching back generations. And what about my assets? I asked. My business and intellectual property. Victoria gave a small laugh that set my teeth on edge. Your educational software venture is certainly charming, dear, but we are talking about substantial wealth and property holdings. The scale is quite different. The condescension in her tone was unmistakable. In their eyes, I was a nobody from a modest background who should be grateful for the opportunity to marry into their prestigious family. Any suggestion that I might have assets worth protecting was laughable to them. Perhaps you would like us to add a clause about your company, Richard offered magnanimously. Though frankly, should you and Ethan divorce, he would likely be generous regardless of legal obligations. He has always had a soft spot for supporting underdogs. I felt heat rising to my face, but forced myself to remain composed. When does this need to be signed? I asked. Today would be ideal, Victoria said, producing a Mont Blanc pen from her jacket pocket. The wedding is in 3 days, and we would like this settled well before then. I set the document down carefully. I would need to have my own lawyer review this first. Richard's eyebrows rose fractionally. Your own lawyer? Is that necessary? Our family attorney who drafted this is one of the best in Chicago. Best for the Blackwood family interests, certainly, I replied. But as you have just pointed out, our interests may not be perfectly aligned in this matter. Victoria's perfectly composed face showed the first crack of annoyance. Sophia, this is really quite standard. Everyone signs these nowadays. It is simply practical. Then you will not object to giving me 24 hours to have it professionally reviewed, I countered. Richard and Victoria exchanged a look. I am afraid we must insist on having this resolved today, Richard said firmly. These matters can become complicated if left too long and with the wedding so close. Are you saying the wedding depends on me signing this document today without legal advice? I asked, wanting absolute clarity on their position. Victoria's smile returned cold as January in Chicago. What we are saying, dear, is that the Blackwood family has certain non-negotiable expectations for anyone marrying into the family. Ethan understands this. If you truly love him, you will understand as well. Sign it or the wedding is off, Richard stated bluntly. That is the bottom line. We have invested considerably in this wedding, but we will cancel it if necessary to protect the family interests. The ultimatum hung in the air between us. I looked from Richard's impassive business face to Victoria's smugly confident expression. They were absolutely certain of their power in this situation. In their minds, I was a nobody, facing the choice between signing away my rights or losing the man. I loved and humiliating myself with a cancelled wedding. They expected me to cave immediately. I stood up, gathering the prenuptial agreement. I will need to discuss this with Ethan. Ethan is aware of our position, Victoria said dismissively. He may have been reluctant to broach the subject with you directly, but he understands family obligations. That stung more than anything else, they had said. The idea that Ethan knew about this ambush and had allowed it to happen made my chest constrict painfully. Nevertheless, I said, clutching the document perhaps a bit too tightly, I will need to speak with him before making any decisions. Richard stood as well, buttoning his suit jacket in a practice gesture. You have until tomorrow morning, Sophia, 9:00 a.m. We will expect your signature or your decision to cancel the wedding. We truly hope you will make the sensible choice, Victoria added, not bothering to stand. Ethan cares for you deeply. It would be a shame to hurt him over a prize. Simple formality that protects everyone involved. I nodded stiffly and turned to leave the prenup, feeling like a lead weight in my hands. As I walked out to my car, I heard Victoria's voice drifting from the open window of the sitting room. She will sign. Where else would she find a match like Ethan? Certainly not in whatever community college circles her parents frequent. Richard's low laugh and response was the final turn of the knife. I got into my car, placed the prenup on the passenger seat, and managed to drive past the ornate gates of the Blackwood estate before the tears started to fall. The drive home was a blur. Tears streamed down my face as Chicago's upscale neighborhoods gave way to the more familiar landscape of downtown. I had to pull over twice when the crying made it impossible to see the road clearly. My phone rang 4 times, Ethan's name flashing on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. I needed to process what had happened before I could talk to him. At a red light, memories flashed through my mind, like scenes from a movie I had somehow starred in without realizing. Victoria commenting on my practical choice of car when I drove it to their house for the first time. Richard asking pointed questions about my business model and then dismissing educational technology as a niche market without real growth potential. The Christmas dinner where Ethan's brother had asked if I would be keeping my little company going after marriage, as if it were a hobby rather than my passion and livelihood. I had ignored or excused all these moments, believing they were isolated incidents or misunderstandings. Now I saw them as part of a pattern, a consistent underestimation of my worth because I lacked their pedigree and perceived wealth. When I finally reached my apartment, I called the one person I knew would understand. They did what? Jenna's voice rose with indignation over the phone 3 days before the wedding. That is beyond tacky sofa manipulative. Jenna had been my roommate in college and remained my closest friend. She knew everything about me, including the full extent of my financial situation, which was why she found the Blackwoods' behavior particularly gling. The worst part is that apparently Ethan knew, I said, curling up on my couch with the phone pressed to my ear. He just did not have the guts to tell me himself. You do not know that for sure, Jenna cautioned. His parents could be bluffing. Either way, it does not look good for him, I replied. Either he knew and let them ambush me, or he has so little control in his relationship with them that they can threaten to cancel his wedding without his knowledge. Jenna was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do about the prenup? Have you read through all of it yet? Enough to? No, it is completely one-sided. They even have clauses that could affect my clothes. Intellectual property rights to my company's software. Are you serious? That is outrageous. Jenna's outrage mirrored my own. You know what you need to do, right? Call Harold first thing tomorrow. Harold Winters had been my grandfather's attorney and continued to manage my legal affairs. He was shrewd, experienced, and most importantly, completely devoted to protecting my interests. I will, I promised, but first I need to talk to Ethan. I need to understand where he stands in all this. After hanging up with Jenna, I finally gathered the courage to call Ethan back. He answered on the first ring. Sophia, thank God. Mom said you left upset. What happened? His concerned tone almost made me falter, but the memory of Victoria's smug face strengthened my resolve. What happened? I said carefully, is that your parents ambushed me with a prenuptial agreement and told me I either sign it by tomorrow morning or the wedding is off. They also implied you were fully aware of this plan. The silence on the other end was damning. Ethan, I prompted. I did not know they were going to approach you like that, he finally said, his voice strained. I told them I would discuss it with you myself. So you did know about the prenup, I confirmed, my heart sinking. Sophia, try to understand. Every marriage in my family for generations has had a prenuptial agreement. It is just how things are done, and you did not think this was something to mention to me before your parents cornered me 3 days before our wedding? He sighed heavily. I was going to bring it up. I just kept putting it off because I knew it would upset you and wedding planning was already stressful enough. So, you left it for your parents to handle like I am some problem to be managed. That is not fair, Ethan protested. I was trying to protect you. Protect me? I laughed bitterly. By letting your parents blindside me with an ultimatum. By letting them include clauses that could affect my business. That is not protection, Ethan. That is cowardice. You are overreacting, he said, his voice taking on the placating tone I had heard him use with difficult clients. It is just a standard legal document. Everyone signs them these days. Have you actually read it? I challenged. Another telling pause. Not in detail, he admitted. Dad said it was the standard family template. The standard family template that ensures I walk away with nothing in a divorce regardless of what I contribute to our marriage or how long we are together. I summarized the template that could potentially give your family claim to intellectual property developed by my company. That cannot be right, Ethan said. But uncertainty had crept into his voice. Dad would not do that. Read it yourself, I suggested. Section 4, paragraph 3. I heard rustling on his end, presumably as he located a copy of the document. I need to look this over more carefully, he said after a moment, sounding troubled. Some of this language is more aggressive than I expected. Your parents gave me until 9:00 a.m. tomorrow to sign it or cancel the wedding, I reminded him. What is your position on that ultimatum? They should not have done that, he said quickly. Of course, the wedding is not contingent on this. We can work it out, can we? Because your mother made it very clear that this is a non-negotiable condition for marrying into the Blackwood family. Mom can be intense, but she does not make these decisions. We do. I wanted to believe him, but doubt had taken root. Then call them right now. Tell them the ultimatum is off the table and that we will address this after the wedding. Sophia, be reasonable. We cannot just dismiss this entirely. A prenup makes sense given the circumstances. What circumstances? I pressed. The fact that your family has money, and I presumably do not. It is more complicated than that, he hedged. There are family trusts, business interests, things far too complex for a simple teacher's daughter to understand. I finished for him, echoing the condescension I had heard in Victoria's voice. That is not what I meant, and you know it, Ethan said, frustration evident in his tone. Why are you making this so difficult? It is just a piece of paper that hopefully we will never need. If it is just a piece of paper, why is it worth threatening to cancel our wedding over? He had no good answer for that. I need some time to think, I said finally, and you need to decide where you stand. Ethan, with your parents or with me? That is not a fair choice, he protested. I love you, but they are my family, and what am I supposed to be in 3 days? I asked quietly. The question hung between us unanswered. I will call you tomorrow, I said, and ended the call before he could respond. I sat in the silence of my apartment, the phone clutched in my hand, tears threatening again. Then I noticed the prenup still sitting on my coffee table, and something shifted inside me. Sadness gave way to determination. If the Blackwoods wanted to make this about money and power, perhaps it was time they learned I had both. I opened my laptop and pulled up my financial portfolio. My grandfather's inheritance had grown to $7.5 million through careful investment. My company, EdaCheck Solutions, had recently been valued at $1.5 million during our last funding round, bringing my total net worth to around $9 million. Not Blackwood money perhaps, but substantial enough to change the dynamics of this conversation entirely. For 3 years, I had kept my financial situation private, not out of shame, but because I wanted to be loved. For myself, not my bank account. I had watched Ethan's friends and acquaintances treat him differently because of his family name and wealth, and I had no desire for that kind of superficial attention. Besides, in the tech world, flying under the radar had strategic advantages, but now facing the prospect of signing away my rights or losing the man I loved, I realized my silence had allowed the Blackwoods to construct a narrative about me that was entirely false. They saw me as a gold digger reaching above my station when in reality I was a successful businesswoman choosing to share my life with their son as an equal. As this realization crystallized, a plan began to form in my mind. I would not be bullied or manipulated. I would not sign their one-sided prenup, but neither would I walk away from the man I loved without a fight. I sent a quick text to Harold: need urgent meeting. Tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. prenup situation, wedding in 3 days. Will explain in person. His response came quickly. Will be at your office at 7 sharp. Bring all documents. I slept fitfully that night, cycling through anger, hurt, determination, and doubt. By morning, however, one thing was clear. The time for hiding my success was over. The Blackwoods had forced this confrontation, and now they would have to deal with the real Sophia Williams, not the modest school teacher's daughter they thought they could intimidate. At 6:45 the next morning, I was already at my downtown office reviewing the prenuptial agreement line by line and making notes. I had dressed deliberately in one of my power outfits, a tailored, charcoal gray suit that projected confidence and authority. My hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, and I wore the pearl earrings my grandfather had given me for my college graduation, a reminder of where I came from and the prosanically sensed in age, the values that had guided me to success. Harold arrived precisely at 7, immaculate as always, in his bespoke suit, silver hair, perfectly combed, carrying his weathered leather briefcase that had seen decades of legal battles. At 72, he was still one of the sharpest attorneys in Chicago, with a reputation for being ruthlessly effective while maintaining impeccable ethics. Good morning, Sophia, he greeted me, setting his briefcase on my conference table. I must say, when I received your text, I was quite surprised. You never mentioned a prenuptial agreement in our previous wedding discussions because there was not one until yesterday. I explained, handing him the document. 3 days before the wedding, my future in-laws ambushed me with this and an ultimatum to sign it by 9 a.m. today or cancel the wedding. Harold's bushy eyebrows rose as he accepted the document. That is rather unorthodox timing, to put it mildly. Read it, I urged, particularly Section 4 on intellectual property and Section 6 on asset division. He put on his reading glasses and began scanning the document, his expression growing increasingly grave as he progressed. After about 15 minutes of careful reading, he set it down and removed his glasses. This is one of the most aggressively one-sided prenuptial agreements I have seen in 45 years of practice, he stated flatly. And I have seen some doozies, especially among old money families. Can you fight it? I asked. A slow smile spread across Harold's face, the kind that had likely struck fear into opposing counsel for decades. My dear, I will not just fight it, I will eviscerate it and replace it with something that actually protects your substantial interests. He opened his briefcase and extracted a legal pad. Let us be clear about your position. Your net worth currently stands at approximately $9 million, correct? I nodded. And the Blackwoods are unaware of this fact. Completely unaware, I confirmed. I have always kept my financial situation private. Only my parents, Jenna, and you know the full extent of it. Harold chuckled, a deep rumbling sound that conveyed genuine amusement. Well, this is going to be quite the revelation for them. He tapped his pen against the legal pad. Do you want to salvage this relationship, or should we simply refuse their terms and let the chips fall where they may? The question gave me pause. Despite everything, I did love Ethan. The issue was not with him directly, but with the power dynamics his family was trying to establish. I want to salvage it, I said finally, but only if Ethan is willing to stand with me as a true partner, and only if his family recognizes that I am entering this marriage as an equal, not as some charity case they are graciously welcoming despite my perceived lack of pedigree. Very well, Harold nodded. Then we craft a counteroffer, a fair and balanced prenuptial agreement that protects both parties equally. For the next 2 hours, Harold and I worked on creating a new document. He drafted language that protected both my assets and Ethan's, established fair terms for property division in the event of divorce, and most importantly, included ironclad protection for my intellectual property and business interests. Now for the presentation strategy, Harold said as we finalized the document. Timing and setting will be crucial. When and where do you want to deliver this counter-offer? I considered this carefully. There are 2 conversations that need to happen. First, I need to speak with Ethan privately. Then, assuming that goes well, we need to present this to his parents together. I suggest a neutral location for the family meeting, Harold advised. Somewhere public enough to discourage extreme reactions, but private enough for a confidential discussion. The private dining room at Lakeview Restaurant, I decided it is upscale, enough to appeal to the Blackwood sensibilities, but on neutral territory. Excellent choice, Harold approved. And for the supporting documentation, I opened a folder on my desk. I have my complete financial portfolio here, including bank statements, investment accounts, and the most recent valuation of my company. Everything is updated and verified as of last month. Harold reviewed the documents, nodding in satisfaction. These will make your position abundantly clear. Now, let us discuss your approach. With Ethan, we spent another hour refining my strategy for both conversations. By the time Harold left at 10:30, I felt prepared and confident. I had a solid plan, a fair prenuptial agreement, and most importantly, the resolve to stand up for myself and the relationship I wanted. After Harold departed, I called Jenna again to update her. "So, you are really doing this?" she asked after I explained the plan. "Revealing your financial situation after keeping it private all this time. I do not see another option," I replied. "Not if I want a marriage based on truth and equality." "And what if Ethan is angry that you kept this from him?" Jenna pressed. "Have you considered that possibility?" "I had extensively." "Then we will have to work through that together," I said. "But if he cannot understand why I wanted to be loved for myself rather than my bank account, then maybe we are not as compatible as I thought." "Fair point," Jenna conceded. "For what it is worth, I think you are handling this with incredible grace." I would have told Victoria Blackwood exactly where she could shove that prenup. That made me laugh, releasing some of the tension I had been carrying. The day is not over yet. I may still get to that point. After hanging up, I sent Ethan a text. "We need to talk. Meet me at Carlucci's at 1:00 p.m. Just the two of us." His response came quickly. "I will be there. I love you." Those 3 words brought a fresh wave of emotion. Despite everything, I still believed he meant them. The question was whether love alone would be enough to weather this storm. I spent the next hour preparing myself, not just mentally, but physically. I went to the salon in my building for a blowout that left my hair looking sleek and professional. Then I touched up my makeup, opting for a polished look that projected confidence without being intimidating. The pearl earrings remained a talisman of sorts, connecting me to my roots and the grandfather who had always believed in me. By the time I left to meet Ethan, I felt like a warrior heading into battle, armed with truth principle and 9 million reasons why the Blackwoods had severely underestimated me. Carlucci's was one of our favorite restaurants, an upscale Italian place where we had celebrated our first anniversary. The familiar setting felt right for this conversation, a reminder of happier times and the foundation of love that had brought us to the brink of marriage. I arrived a few minutes early and requested a quiet corner table. The Matra, who knew us as regulars, led me to a secluded spot near the back, well away from other diners, perfect for what would likely be an intense conversation. Ethan arrived precisely at 1 looking haggard. His usually impeccable appearance was slightly rumpled, his tie a bit crooked, dark circles under his eyes, suggesting he had slept as poorly as I had. When he saw me, relief washed over his face. "Sophia," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Thank you for meeting me. I have been worried sick since our call last night." I studied him carefully, searching for signs of the man I had fallen in love with rather than the Blackwood heir who had allowed his parents to ambush me. "I almost did not come," I admitted. "Your parents put me in an impossible position." He reached for my hand across the table. "I know, and I am so sorry. I spoke with them last night after we talked. It did not go well. That caught my attention." "What happened?" I told them. Their ultimatum was unacceptable, and that if anyone was going to cancel the wedding over this, it would be me, not them. A flicker of hope ignited in my chest. And how did they respond? Ethan sighed heavily. Dad said I was being naive and emotional. Mom cried and accused me of choosing an outsider over family. It was the same manipulation. They have used my entire life. Did it work? I asked pointedly. He met my eyes. Directly. Number not this time. I told them either they withdraw the ultimatum, or I would personally call every wedding guest tonight and explain exactly why the ceremony was cancelled. Despite everything, I felt a surge of pride in him. That must have been difficult. It was terrifying, he admitted with a wrathful smile, but also strangely liberating. For the first time in my life, I walked out of that house without conceding to their demands. The waiter approached and we both ordered just drinks, neither of us having much appetite. When we were alone again, Ethan continued, I spent the night at Jason's place trying to figure out what to do next. The prenup itself is not unreasonable in theory, but the way they approached it and some of the terms I saw, it made me ashamed. To be a Blackwood, I took a deep breath. This was the moment to begin revealing my own truth. Ethan, there is something important I need to tell you. Something I have kept from you throughout our relationship. His expression shifted to concern. What is it? I am not who your parents think I am, I began carefully. Or rather, I am more than they have assumed. Confusion flickered across his face. What do you mean? I reached into my bag and withdrew a folder containing printouts of my financial statements. When my grandfather died during my senior year of college, he left me an inheritance, a substantial one. I slid the folder across the table. Ethan opened it with a puzzled expression that quickly transformed to shock as he scanned the documents. $7.5 million, he read incredulously. And your company? Another $1.5 million. Sophia, this is why did you never tell me? For the same reason you do not introduce yourself as Ethan Blackwood of the Chicago Blackwoods to everyone you meet, I explained. I wanted to be known for who I am, not what I have. I wanted genuine relationships based on mutual respect and shared values, not wealth or status. He was still processing the financial statements, flipping through his pages with growing astonishment. All this time my parents have been treating you like a gold digger. After the Blackwood fortune I finished for him. Ironic is not it. Ethan looked up at me. His expression a mix of amazement and something else. Was it hurt? Did you not trust me enough to share this? That was the question I had been dreading, but I owed him honesty. It was never about trust. Ethan, at first it simply did not seem relevant. Then, as I got to know your family and saw how much emphasis they placed on wealth and status, I became reluctant to reveal it. I did not want to be valued for my bank account, and honestly, I was curious to see how they would treat me without knowledge of my financial situation. As a test, he asked a note of defensiveness entering his voice. Not of you, I clarified quickly. Never of you. But yes, in some ways, it became a test of your family's character. 1. They failed spectacularly yesterday. Our drinks arrived, providing a brief respite from the intensity of the conversation. When the waiter departed, Ethan took a long sip of his scotch before speaking again. I understand your reasoning, he said slowly, but I cannot help feeling there was a lack of transparency between us that cuts both ways. I should have told you about the prenup expectations and you should have told me about your financial situation. He was right and I acknowledged it with a nod. You are right. Perfect honesty would have avoided this entire situation. But we are here now and we need to decide where we go from here. What do you want to do? He asked, and I could hear the genuine question beneath the words. He was not just asking about the prenup or the wedding, but about us, our future. I pulled out another folder, this one, containing the prenuptial agreement Harold and I had drafted that morning. I want a marriage of equals, I said, sliding it toward him. I want a partnership where we both protect what we have built individually while committing to build something greater together. And I want in-laws who respect me as that equal partner, not as some charity case, their son nobly rescued from middle-class obscurity. Ethan opened the folder and began reading the new prenup. As a lawyer himself, he quickly grasped the fairness of the terms compared to his parents' version. This is entirely reasonable, he said, looking up, balanced. Protection for both parties, clear terms on intellectual property, fair approaches to future earnings and assets acquired during marriage. That is what a prenuptial agreement should be, I replied. Not a weapon, but a shield that protects both parties equally. He closed the folder and reached for my hand. Again. This time I allowed him to take it. So, what happens next? That depends. On you, I told him honestly. I need to know where you stand, Ethan. Not just about the prenup, but about our relationship and your family's role in it. I need to know that when we say our vows in 3 days, we are truly becoming a team that faces the world together, including your parents. Ethan squeezed my hand, his eyes never leaving mine. When I left my parents' house last night, I made a choice. I chose us, not because it was easy, but because it was right. I love you, Sophia. I love your brilliance, your integrity, your compassion. Whether you have $9 or 9 million does not change that. The sincerity in his voice melted some of the ice that had formed around my heart. Then, here is what I propose, I said. We meet with your parents this evening. Together we present this new prenuptial agreement as non-negotiable. We make it clear that our marriage will be a partnership of equals, and that the dynamics between us and your family need to reflect that reality. They will not take it well, Ethan warned. Especially my mother. Probably not, I agreed. But how they react will tell us everything we need to know about the future of our relationship with them. He nodded. Slowly. You are right. It is time to establish boundaries that should have been set long ago. He raised his glass in a small toast to facing the Blackwood Inquisition together. I clinked my glass against his together. As we finished our drinks and finalized our strategy for the evening confrontation, I felt a renewed sense of connection with Ethan. The deceptions between us, both his and mine, had been cleared away. Now we would face his family as a united front with honesty as our foundation and equality as our non-negotiable demand. I sent a quick text to Harold confirming that the first phase of our plan had succeeded. His response was typically succinct. Excellent. Remember, no compromises on the key terms. Good luck. Luck, I thought, as Ethan and I left the restaurant hand in hand, might not be necessary. We had truth on our side now. And in my experience, that was a far more powerful weapon than luck could ever be. At precisely 6 p.m., our car pulled up to the entrance of Lakeview Restaurant. I had chosen it carefully, not just for its neutral territory status, but for its reputation as one of the most discreet, high-end establishments in Chicago. The staff was known for their professionalism and ability to pretend they heard and saw nothing, no matter how heated a business discussion might become. Ethan helped me from the car, his hand warm and reassuring against mine. We had spent the afternoon refining our approach and reviewing the new prenuptial agreement together, strengthening our united front. He wore a sharply tailored navy suit that projected authority with the intimidation factor his father's suits always carried. I had changed into a cream-colored dress that was both elegant and powerful, paired with a tailored blazer and my grandmother's pearls at my neck to match the earrings. Ready? Ethan asked as we stood before the restaurant's entrance. As ready as I will ever be, I replied, squeezing his hand. The matra greeted us by name and led us to the private dining room I had reserved. It was tastefully appointed with a mahogany table that could seat 10, though only 4 place settings had been arranged. Crystal glasses caught the light from the elegant chandelier overhead, and the walls were adorned with tasteful original artwork. The large windows offered a stunning view of Lake Michigan, the water glittering in the early evening light. Your other guests have not yet arrived, the maitre d' informed us. Would you care for drinks while you wait? We both ordered sparkling water. Alcohol would not serve us well in the upcoming confrontation. They will be late, Ethan predicted after the matra departed. It is a power move. Mom never arrives anywhere before making people wait at least 15 minutes. He was exactly right. At 6:17, the door opened to admit Richard and Victoria Blackwood. Richard was in his element in a charcoal suit nearly identical to the one he had worn during our prenup ambush. Victoria had opted for a designer dress in deep burgundy that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments, accessorized with diamond earrings that caught the light with every slight movement of her head. Ethan, darling, Victoria said, ignoring me completely as she erased her son's cheeks. What a charming venue. Though I am not entirely sure why we needed this formal setting. For a simple signature, Richard nodded curtly in my direction. The barest acknowledgement of my existence. I trust you have come to a sensible decision. Sophia 9 a.m. has come and gone, but we are willing to be flexible given the circumstances. Please have a seat, I said, gesturing to the chairs across from where Ethan and I were already seated. We have much to discuss. Something in my tone must have alerted Victoria that this would not be the simple capitulation she expected. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she took her seat, arranging herself with practiced elegance. We have reviewed your prenuptial agreement. Ethan began, his voice steady and professional, and found it unacceptable in both its approach and its terms. Richard's eyebrows shot up. Unacceptable? It is the standard Blackwood family agreement. Your brother and sister both signed identical documents without this drama. They married people from backgrounds similar to ours, Ethan pointed out. The power dynamics were entirely different. Power dynamics, Victoria repeated with a dismissive wave of her manicured hand. This is not some sociological experiment, Ethan. It is a simple legal protection that any prudent family would insist upon. I placed my leather portfolio on the table, opening it to reveal our counterproposal and supporting documents. We agree that prudent legal protection makes sense, I said calmly, which is why we have prepared an alternative prenuptial agreement that protects both parties equally. Richard's expression darkened. That was not the arrangement. You were to sign our document, not present alternatives. Plans change, I replied, meeting his gaze directly, especially when new information comes to light. The waiter entered with our sparkling water and took Richard and Victoria's drink orders. The brief interruption did nothing to dissipate the tension that had settled over the table like a heavy cloud. When we were alone again, I slid the new prenuptial agreement across the table. This document provides fair, balanced protection for both the Blackwood family assets and my own personal holdings. Your holdings, Victoria, could not quite suppress a condescending smile. Your little software company hardly requires the same level of protection as generations of Blackwood wealth. You might be surprised, Ethan said, a hint of pride in his voice as he looked at me. I extracted the financial statements from my portfolio and placed them on top of the prenuptial agreement. My current net worth is approximately $9 million, I stated matter-of-factly. $7.5 million in diversified investments from my grandfather's estate and $1.5 million in the form of my company valuation from our last funding round. The shock that registered on both their faces was everything I had imagined and more. Richard recovered first his lawyer's mind, quickly recalibrating as he reached for the statements with barely concealed disbelief. That is impossible, Victoria said, color rising in her cheeks. You drive a 5-year-old Audi. Your parents are teachers. I value financial responsibility over displays of wealth, I replied evenly. And yes, my parents taught me the importance of education, hard work, and living within one's means. Lessons that have served me well. Richard was scanning the documents with growing consternation. These appear legitimate, he admitted. Reluctantly, why keep this secret? Would you have treated me differently if you had known? I countered. The flush deepening on Victoria's face was answer enough. This changes the equation significantly, Richard said, lawyer mode fully engaged. Now, we would need to review any alternative agreement carefully before proceeding. Of course, I agreed. That is only fair. Just as it would have been fair to give me time to review your original document with my attorney. Victoria was still struggling to reconcile her perception of me with the financial reality before her. Your grandfather left you $7 million. What did he do? He invested wisely over a lifetime of modest living, I explained. Not unlike the first Blackwood who built your family fortune, I imagine. That comparison clearly did not sit well with Victoria. But before she could respond, Ethan spoke up. Mom, Dad, the issue here is not just the prenup itself, but how this entire situation has been handled. Springing this on Sophia 3 days before our wedding was inappropriate and disrespectful. We thought it best to resolve it efficiently, Richard defended, though with notably less conviction than before, by threatening to cancel our wedding if she did not comply immediately. Ethan challenged. That is not efficiency. It is coercion. Victoria turned to her son, switching tactics. Darling, we were only trying to protect you and the family legacy. Surely you understand that. What? I understand, Ethan replied firmly. Is that you made assumptions about the woman I love without bothering to know her and then tried to use financial leverage to control our relationship? That stops now. I had never loved him more than in that moment watching him stand firm against the manipulation that had likely worked on him his entire life. The new prenuptial agreement I redirected their attention protects both the Blackwood assets and my own. It establishes fair terms for property division and any potential divorce based on contribution and duration of marriage, rather than simply reverting everything to original ownership. It also contains clear language protecting my intellectual property rights and business interests just as it protects the Blackwood family business interests. Richard was already reading through the document with a lawyer's practiced eye. Some of these terms are unusual, he noted, though not dismissively. But fair, Ethan emphasized. Unlike the document you presented to Sophia, we need time to have our attorneys review this, Richard said, closing the folder. You have until tomorrow afternoon, I replied. The wedding is in 2 days, and we need this resolved before then. Victoria's gaze snapped to me, honest to having deadlines imposed by others. That is hardly sufficient time for proper legal review. It was sufficient time for me, according to your original ultimatum, I reminded her. Richard placed a restraining hand on his wife's arm, recognizing the shift in leverage. We will have our team review it first thing tomorrow morning and provide feedback by 3:00 p.m. Any proposed changes must maintain the fundamental balance of the agreement, Ethan stipulated. This is not a negotiation to revert to one-sided terms. Understood. Richard nodded businessman to businessman. Victoria had been uncharacteristically quiet, her eyes moving between me, Ethan, and the financial statements still on the table. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost some of its imperious quality. I may have misjudged certain aspects of your situation, Sophia, though I still find it odd that you would conceal such information from your future family. It was as close to an apology as Victoria Blackwood was likely capable of offering. I decided to meet her halfway. Perhaps we all could have communicated more openly from the beginning, I acknowledged. Moving forward, I hope we can build a relationship based on mutual respect, rather than assumptions. The waiter returned with Richard and Victoria's drinks and inquired about dinner. By unspoken agreement, we all declined this meeting clearly, having served its primary purpose. As we prepared to leave, Richard held out his hand to me, a gesture that would have been unthinkable 24 hours earlier. You have proven yourself a formidable negotiator, Sophia. The Blackwood family may benefit from such unexpected perspectives. I accepted his handshake, recognizing it as a peace offering of sorts. I look forward to contributing to the family in many ways, Mr. Blackwood. Victoria's farewell was less warm, but notably lacking the condescension that had characterized our previous interactions. Progress, if not perfection. Once they had departed, Ethan pulled me into his arms right there in the private dining room. You were magnificent, he whispered against my hair. Absolutely magnificent. We were magnificent, I corrected him, leaning back to meet his eyes. Together? He smiled, a genuine smile, untainted by the stress of the past 2 days. Together. I like the sound of that. As we left the restaurant hand in hand, under a sky turning to twilight, I felt a profound sense of rightness settle over me. The road ahead would not be perfectly smooth, especially with Victoria as a mother-in-law, but the fundamental dynamics had shifted. We had established ourselves as equals, both to each other and to his family. It was a foundation strong enough to build a marriage on. 2 days later, I stood in a small antechamber of the Drake Hotel, wearing the sleek, modern wedding dress I had chosen months ago. The prenuptial agreement had been signed yesterday afternoon, with only minor adjustments to the language that did not affect the balanced protection it provided both families. Richard had been surprisingly reasonable during the final negotiations, while Victoria had maintained a dignified distance from the process, perhaps still coming to terms with her misjudgment of the situation. Jenna adjusted my veil, her eyes suspiciously bright. You look stunning, Soph, and not just because of this amazing dress. There is something different about you today. Confidence my mother supplied from where she was arranging the train. My daughter finally stopped hiding her light. She was right. The past 3 days had transformed me, in subtle but significant ways. Standing up to the Blackwoods, revealing my true financial situation and establishing clear boundaries had lifted a weight I had not fully recognized was there. I had spent 3 years carefully managing perceptions, worried that my wealth would change how people saw me. The irony that this fear had led to exactly the type of judgment I had hoped to avoid was not lost on me. There was a soft knock at the door, and to my surprise, Victoria Blackwood entered. She had foregone her usual intimidating elegance for a softer, more maternal look in pale blue that complemented, rather than competed with my bridal ensemble. "May I have a moment alone with Sophia?" she asked, her voice lacking its usual imperious tone. "My mother and—" Jenna exchanged glances before nodding and stepping out, leaving me face to face with my soon-to-be mother-in-law. Victoria approached slowly, taking in my appearance with an expression I could not quite read. "You make a beautiful bride," she said finally. "Thank you," I replied, uncertain where this conversation was heading. She fingered the delicate lace of my veil, a surprisingly vulnerable gesture from a woman who calculated her every move. "I owe you an apology, Sophia, a proper one, not the half-hearted acknowledgement I offered at the restaurant. That was unexpected." Victoria Blackwood did not strike me as someone familiar with apologies. "My behavior was inexcusable," she continued. "Not just the prenuptial agreement ambush, but the months of subtle condescension and judgment before that. I made assumptions based on superficial factors and never bothered to know the real woman my son loves." The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. "That cannot have been easy to admit," I acknowledged. A small rueful smile touched her lips. "The Blackwoods are not known for admitting mistakes. It is a family trait I hope you and Ethan will improve upon in the next generation." She reached into her clutch and extracted a small velvet box. "I brought you something, a peace offering of sorts." I accepted the box cautiously and opened it to find a pair of diamond and sapphire earrings that clearly had significant age and history. "These belonged to Ethan's great-grandmother," Victoria explained. "She was the daughter of a factory worker who married into the Blackwood family against considerable opposition. She went on to save the family business during the Depression, through sheer determination and business acumen that her husband lacked." The parallels were obvious, and I was touched by both the gesture and its symbolic meaning. "They are beautiful," I said sincerely. "Thank you for sharing this history with me. Perhaps you would consider wearing them today. Something old and something blue, as they say." I nodded, removing my pearl earrings and allowing Victoria to help me put on the sapphire ones. It was a small moment of connection, a tentative bridge across the chasm that had separated us. "Ethan loves you deeply," she said, as she stepped back to regard me. "That should have been enough for me from the beginning. I hope you can forgive my failure to see that. I think we have both learned something about assumptions and appearances," I replied. "Moving forward is what matters now." She nodded, composing herself with visible effort. "Well, I should rejoin Richard. Your father will be here shortly to walk you down the aisle." At the door, she paused. "Welcome to the family, Sophia." Truly. After she left, I studied my reflection. In the mirror, the sapphire earrings catching the light when I turned my head. They represented something important, a recognition that I was not just marrying Ethan, but joining a lineage of strong women who had shaped the Blackwood destiny in their own ways. My father arrived minutes later, his eyes growing misty when he saw me. "My brilliant girl," he said, embracing me carefully to avoid disturbing my dress. "Ready to start this new chapter?" "More than ready," I assured him. The ceremony was everything I had hoped for, intimate, despite the 200 guests in attendance. When Ethan saw me walking down the aisle, the love shining in his eyes made everything else fade away. All the stress and conflict of the past week disappearing in the face of what truly mattered. Our vows were traditional but spoken with a depth of meaning that moved many to tears, including surprisingly Victoria. At the reception, I noticed subtle shifts in how the Blackwood family and friends interacted with me. Gone was the condescension, replaced by genuine interest and respect. Richard introduced me to his business associates with pride, emphasizing my entrepreneurial success. Victoria made a point of seating me next to her oldest friend, a federal judge whose approval clearly mattered to her. Ethan noticed it too. Amazing what $9 million can do for one's social standing, he murmured in my ear as we shared our first dance. It is not about the money, I replied. It is about standing up for yourself and demanding respect. Perhaps a bit of both, he acknowledged with a smile. Either way, I have never been prouder to call you my wife. Our honeymoon in the Greek islands was a blissful escape from family dynamics and prenuptial negotiations. For 2 weeks, we were simply Ethan and Sophia, two people in love, exploring whitewashed villages and crystal blue waters. We talked about the future, about building our life together as true partners, and about the boundaries we would maintain with both our families. Going forward, 6 months later, those conversations were put to the test when Victoria began, dropping hints about a Blackwood family tradition of Sunday dinners and the expectation that we would attend weekly. Once a month, Ethan countered firmly when we discussed it privately. We need our own traditions and time together, I agreed, and to my surprise, Victoria accepted this boundary with minimal resistance, perhaps recognizing that the new dynamics between us were healthier for everyone. Richard showed his evolving respect in more practical ways. He invited me to consult on a technology upgrade for the family law firm and actually listened to my recommendations. When my company secured a major contract with the Chicago public school system, he sent a congratulatory note that was both professional and warm. Most significantly, Ethan and I established our own household rhythm independent of Blackwood expectations. We bought a home that we chose together in a neighborhood we both loved, using a Betrayal combination of our resources. We made financial decisions as a team, each contributing our expertise, neither dominating the other. The prenuptial agreement that had caused such turmoil remained locked in a safe deposit box, hopefully never to be needed. It's true. Value had been in the process of creating it in establishing that our marriage would be a partnership of equals regardless of family name or net worth. As I reflect on that tumultuous week before our wedding, I am grateful for the crisis that forced us to confront issues that might otherwise have festered beneath the surface for years. Those 3 days of conflict and revelation strengthened our foundation in ways that smooth sailing never could have. I learned that hiding parts of yourself, even with the best intentions, can create more problems than it solves. Ethan learned to stand firm against family pressure when it threatened what truly mattered to him. Together, we discovered that true partnership requires both vulnerability and strength. The courage to reveal your whole self and the fortitude to stand up for the relationship you want to build. To the Blackwoods, wealth had always been about power and status tools for controlling others and maintaining their position. They initially saw my perceived lack of wealth as a deficiency to be managed. When they discovered my financial reality, they were forced to reevaluate not just their assessment of me, but their entire approach to family relationships. For me, wealth had always been about independence and opportunity, not power over others. That fundamental difference in perspective continues to shape my relationship with my in-laws, sometimes creating tension, but often leading to meaningful conversations about values and priorities. Marriage, I have discovered, is not just the union of two people, but the intersection of two life philosophies, two approaches to everything from money to family to career ambitions. Finding harmony requires constant communication, mutual respect, and the willingness to stand firm on core principles while compromising on lesser matters. When faced with that prenuptial ultimatum 3 days before my wedding, I could have simply signed the document to avoid conflict. I could have walked away in anger and hurt. Instead, I chose the harder path of confrontation and truth, not just about my financial situation, but about the type of marriage and family relationship I was willing to accept. That choice set the tone for our marriage and for my place within the Blackwood family, not as an outsider to be managed, but as an equal contributor to be respected. It is a choice I would make again in a heartbeat. Have you ever had to stand your ground against people who underestimated you? Did you reveal your true worth and wipe those smug grins clean? Share your story in the comments below, and if this tale of turning the tables on those who misjudged you resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to my channel for more stories of triumph and transformation, and share with someone who might need encouragement to stand up for themselves. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to be less than who you truly are.